The Toyota CHR has been around for some time, and despite that fact it's still quite a popular choice among consumers looking for a crossover SUV, and for good reason. It comes from Toyota's pedigree, namely when it comes to fuel economy. And today we're actually going to be putting it through its paces, because we're looking at the plug-in hybrid model, which on paper has got the highest claimed MPG figures. At least for those of us in the UK, higher is better when it comes to MPG. Now right now you'll be able to find it in 3 different trims: the Design, the XL and also the GR Sport. Prices ranging from £39,000 and going up to £44,000 without adding any additional options. Well, it's worth considering right now you can also find it with a £1,500 saving. Elsewhere, I'd like to mention that you will not find it in the entry-level Icon trim, at least for the plug-in hybrid model, and you might also find it in the Orange or the Premier Edition models, which are available in select number of quantities and also depending on where you live. Now, no matter which model or trim level you go for, you'll find a 10-year warranty or 100,000 miles, which is pretty much standard on most Toyotas. This is a 3-year initial warranty and then a service-activated 7-year warranty, which comes thereafter. Now in this video, which will be covered in such a format, we'll see if it's actually worth its price tag and of course how it compares to some of its competitors. But before proceeding, if you do want to find some of the best deals for it, make sure you check out the links down in the description below, the pinned comments, or by scanning the QR code that can be found on your screen. So to kick things off, let's talk about the overall efficiency, because that's arguably one of the most important factors when looking at a Toyota, namely a plug-in hybrid. Now here you've got a 13.6 kilowatt hour battery pack, which you can utilize on its own, in other words in pure EV mode, or you can use it in hybrid mode, where it's also utilizing the engine. Furthermore, you can even use the engine as a generator, and that effectively will charge up the battery pack while you're on the move. You can actually do this manually if you so wish by holding down a button on the center console, and then via your instrument cluster it'll say CHG mode, in other words charging mode. Now this of course is going to reduce the overall efficiency, so worth bearing that in mind. So you might actually want to leave it on its automatic mode so that the vehicle determines for itself what is best. Now the claimed MPG figures are somewhat laughable. Toyota say that the plug-in hybrid will achieve north of 330 MPG, while the hybrid model and the normal petrol model will achieve something like 50 to 60 MPG. Now in my own mixed driving tests, which were done on the motorway, on the country roads and within the city, I netted a very impressive 100 to 110 MPG, which is actually pretty insane if you think about it. This was with the electric portion, which ran for roughly 35 miles, at least from a full charge, and then after it was depleted, I then did further driving. Now, with it then depleted, I was still getting over 60 to 70 MPG, which is actually really, really good. Now, when the battery pack was really depleted for a long period of time and I continued driving, I was still getting roughly 60 MPG. Now that is absolutely incredible figures, but almost expected for a Toyota vehicle, because they really are the kings of efficiency. Now in terms of what you'll be able to see from the mileage leaderboard, here you can see that the CHR really does stand tall in comparison to its main competitors. Therefore meaning that if you do want something that's incredibly efficient, then you certainly want to consider the CHR as one of your top picks. Now another thing that's very important when it comes to a hybrid is the total driving range. And here, via its electric portion, as I did point out, you should get roughly 35 miles, which is not too far off the manufacturer's 41-mile claim. In terms of the petrol tank, it's rated at 43 litres. And therefore combined with its electric portion, you should be able to net roughly 400 to 450 miles without having to stop to refuel or recharge. Pretty much in line with some of its competitors, but of course certain individuals that are looking for a vehicle that has much greater range might want to look elsewhere. Now I would also like to highlight over here that in order to recoup energy back into the battery pack, other than via its engine, you have got regenerative braking. And right now I'm on the B mode, which I've done by initiating by going down on the gear selector. If I were to lift off the accelerator pedal, the vehicle will start decelerating, which is very much great to see. Of course, if you do not want this and you want to coast, you can simply go back in D mode, as I have done now, and as I go back to 30 miles an hour and lift off, the vehicle feels like it is coasting. Now, what I don't like is the fact that if you do want to adjust the regenerative braking modes, you'll have to do this via the instrument cluster. So there are no paddle shifters that are found behind the steering wheel or a convenient menu that you'll find on the infotainment system. Just to demonstrate how cumbersome it is, I'm just going to show it right now via the instrument cluster. In fact, I'm actually going to have to pull over because you can't actually adjust it while you're on the move. So if I just pull up over here on the country roads and now go into my menu, go all the way down. It does take a little while. Go into vehicle settings. Then I can go further down from here and I've got regenerative brake. Here I can then customize the deceleration between level 1, 2 and 3. Thankfully you do have a deceleration memory, which therefore is appreciated. But if I were to go on the move, this option will become grayed out and it won't actually allow me to customize the deceleration while on the move, which I do really think is a mistrick from the manufacturer and also a complete oversight. Now, aside from recouping energy while on the move, you can of course plug it in because it is a PHEV. And here via its Type 2 port, it can take up to 6.6 kilowatts of input. And that's just due to its onboard charger, allowing you to go from roughly 0 to 100% in 2.5 hours. If you were to plug in via regular 3-pin input, it will take you roughly 6 hours. Another important factor is the overall driving comfort. And at the front you've got a MacPherson strut setup, while at the rear you've got a double wishbone configuration. The combination does yield for a pretty pleasurable experience, and therefore when it comes to pottering around town, you don't feel the potholes or speed bumps all that much. Although it's worth noting over here, it doesn't have an advanced suspension setup like you'd find on some alternatives out there, and therefore means that it's not going to compete with adaptive air suspension configurations. Of course, these can also be found at a much steeper price point as well. Therefore, you will feel some of the anomalies. Still, the rebound isn't too pronounced and therefore does feel pretty good. As for chucking around winding country routes, it does actually hold its own, although it does suffer from a little bit of body lean, which is no surprise. In terms of the connection that you have with the front axle, well, it's not exactly one-to-one. It's not going to compete with sportier SUVs out there. Still, in terms of its sport mode preset, the CHR does actually feel pretty nice to drive, and I didn't really have that many complaints. In terms of the overall traction levels that you've got, it operates on a front-wheel drive configuration only, at least in the plug-in hybrid models. And as a result, it means that if you do want that increased degree of confidence, then you might want to look at some of the other plug-in hybrid alternatives, which do also come in an all-wheel drive configuration. Now, one thing that wasn't overly impressive was the overall performance. Now, first off, you've got an eCVT transmission, and therefore if you're putting your foot down to the metal, you can really hear the engine roar at the front of the vehicle. It's not too severe, but just worth considering that it just doesn't feel as refined or indeed smooth in comparison to some alternatives out there. Of course, if you're just going to be driving at lower speeds and taking it a little bit easy, then you're not going to really feel or hear the engine at the front. Now, in terms of the inline 4-cylinder 2-litre petrol engine, it combines with an electric motor and a battery pack to output 164 kilowatts of power or 223 horsepower and 208 newton meters of torque. It's claimed to go from 0 to 62 miles an hour in 7.2 seconds. And from my test, it wasn't actually too far off. Using RaceLogic's Performance Box Touch, I clocked it in from 0 to 20 miles an hour in 2.19 seconds, 0 to 30 miles an hour in 3.24 seconds, 0 to 60 miles an hour in 7.55 seconds, 50 to 70 miles an hour in 4.03 seconds, and also a peak acceleration of 0.46 G. As for its top speed, it's limited to 111 miles an hour, which should certainly suffice for the vast majority of consumers. Aside from this, when it comes to the overall braking performance, in the plug-in hybrid model you've got 17-inch ventilated disc brakes at the front, while at the rear you've got a solid configuration instead. The combination does actually give you a good degree of confidence, so if you ever do have to put your foot down on the brake pedal in an emergency situation, you'll have good confidence that the vehicle will decelerate pretty rapidly. Now, would I like to highlight, however, that in terms of the regenerative braking feel and therefore kind of the automatic braking that does occur, it does feel a little bit grabby, which is quite disappointing, and therefore means that when you're lifting off the accelerator pedal, sometimes the vehicle will kind of decelerate a little hesitantly, and that also includes when going on the drive mode when it's done automatically. So just something you just have to get your head around and indeed adopt your driving style in order to match what Toyota have done with the CHR. So next up we get onto its interior design, and the choice of materials aren't exactly all that premium because you've got certain harsh and scratchy plastic that can be found towards the lower portion of the door frames and the center console. However, it does actually look the part, at least in my opinion. Namely, if you go for the XL and the GR Sport trims, you'll find a suede material that can be found towards the doors. That means each time you're interacting with the vehicle, it just feels all that bit more premium. Now, it's also good to see that the manufacturer has also thought of practicality. You've got physical buttons and dials which are found on the steering wheel. You then also have a dedicated climate control menu. So yes, that's actually quite a nice addition, specifically in this day and age, and therefore means it's very easy to adjust your climates while you're on the move. Now, technology hasn't gone amiss. You have got a 12.3-inch display that's planted towards the center of the dashboard and slightly angled towards the driver. The display itself is very vivid and intuitively laid out with the right sorts of options. It also supports Android Auto and Apple CarPlay over a wired and wireless transmission, which is very much appreciated. Now, you've also got a secondary display, and that is the instrument cluster. Yet again, you've got another 12.3-inch size, and this effectively gives you all the key driving information that you require, including your traversing speed or the safety systems that are in operation. And it's also somewhat customizable with the different menus that you can choose from. Speaking of which, should you want to add a degree of convenience while you're driving, you might want to go for the projected head-up display. This is only present within a pretty spenny package and within the XL trim. However, within this pack, you'll also find the 9-speaker JBL audio system, and this actually comes fitted as standard in the GR Sport trim. It does well across the sound frequency range and is a worthwhile upgrade over the stock 6-speaker system because it adds some additional audio drivers within the cabin and also a pretty hearty subwoofer. In fact, if you want a detailed breakdown of the audio system, make sure you check it out on your pop-up banner or following the links down in the description below or the pinned comments. So moving on, we get onto storage, and towards the dashboard by the passenger, you've got a small little area which can be handy for placing a smartphone or smaller size valuables. Underneath, you have got the glove box, which has thankfully been optimized for right-hand drive vehicles. Towards the center console, you've got a wireless charging bay, which comes included as standard across the entire trim range, and then a small little area next to it, which has got a non-slip material. Further down, you've got 2 cup holders, and then you've also got an area that's found underneath the center armrest. Here you also find a small little tray, which can be handy for placing your key fob. Now, within this storage compartment, you'll also find a USB Type-C port. This is used to provide charge. It sits alongside a 12-volt socket. There's also another USB Type-C port at the front and also the rear of the center console. Now, in terms of the door bins, the front 2 are large enough to accommodate a 500ml bottle alongside some small to medium-sized valuables, although the rear 2 are quite limited. However, there's a small little area within them which can be handy for placing a coffee cup. There is no pull-down armrest compartment, which would have been handy for additional storage. And equally, there's no sort of compartment that can be found towards the rear portion of the center console. Now, of course, when it comes to storage, we have to talk about its boot capacity. And here you've got 310 litres to play around with in the plug-in hybrid models. This is down from 364 to 388 litres in the non-PHEV variants. Now, nonetheless, the boot itself is pretty sizable and also very practical. You've got a hatchback design with 60/40 rear split folding seats, which can also drop down to give you a flat loading bay. There is also a sizable underfloor compartment, which can be handy for taking your charging cables. It is also worth mentioning that in certain trims you have got an electric tailgate. As for its towing capacity, it's unfortunately rated at 725 kilograms for both braked and unbraked trailers, which isn't exactly all that impressive, namely if you can compare and contrast it with some of the alternatives. So what about when it comes to seating comfort? Well, at the front, the seats themselves are very accommodating and soft, and I had no issues whatsoever on my prolonged drives. Furthermore, it's good to see that both seats and also the steering wheel are heated as standard across the entire trim range. Oddly, the heated steering wheel is omitted for some given reason in the spec sheets and the brochure, but I can assure you that it's actually present. Now, in terms of controls, they're manually operated only in the design trim. If, however, you want electronic controls for the driver only, this becomes available in the XL and the GR Sport. Now, as for the rear of the cabin, it's a little bit of a squeeze, namely for adults, and like myself who's just under 6 foot, I did feel that headroom wasn't exactly all that bit optimized, and in terms of legroom, while there is a decent amount, it is worth highlighting that the seats are very diagonally wedged, and therefore will be uncomfortable on longer trips. Furthermore, when it comes to accessing the rear of the cabin, it can be a little bit of a squeeze just due to the kind of sloped roofline. Still, it should suffice for smaller sized families. Now, aside from this, I would like to point out that if you do want to draw in some extra light within the cabin, you might want to look at the panoramic roof. It's optional within the design trim and part of a pretty spenny package in the GR Sport. However, it does become fitted as standard in the XL model. Speaking of which, this brings me onto its exterior design, which of course will differ depending on which trim level you go for. For example, the alloys go from 18, 19 and 20 inch depending on the chosen trim level. No matter what size you actually get, I still do think that the vehicle does look the part. It very much is a little bit of a modern twist in comparison to the older generation models, but still very much is reminiscent of a Toyota, so it doesn't seem like the brand has lost its DNA. From the front, you've got this pretty futuristic kind of look with the headlights which have been designed in a certain way. Towards the side you've got a really nice sporty-esque silhouette, and towards the rear it very much looks the part, thanks to the fact that not only you have a bi-tone design, which is of course only available in certain trims, but also due to the integrated spoiler and tail lights. Frankly, when it comes to the overall looks, I've got no complaints. And yes, in terms of the colour options, there are a whole bunch of them for you to choose from monotone to bitone and bitone plus. This now leads me on to safety, and here the Toyota CHR was tested by Euro NCAP and awarded a full 5 out of 5 stars, scoring 85% in adult occupancy, 86% in child occupancy and 79% in its safety assist scores. Indeed, it should keep you pretty safe in the unlikely event of a serious accident. In terms of the driver assistance system, you've got a whole bunch of them included as standard. Intelligent adaptive cruise control, which actually does work a treat on the motorway by keeping you at a safe distance from the leading vehicle without feeling too jerky either. Road sign assist, adjustable speed limiter, blind spot monitor, lane trace assist, pre-collision system, proactive driving assist, rear cross traffic alert, oncoming car and bike detection, and also emergency driving stop system. Now, all of these are included as standard across the entire trim range, but should you want the driver monitor camera, front cross traffic alert, lane change assist and emergency steering assist, they'll be present in the XL trim, and are also part of a pretty expensive package in the GR Sport. Now, while these systems are very much appreciated, it is worth pointing out they become re-enabled every single time you power on the vehicle, which is a nonsensical regularity requirement. And as a result here means that if you do want to disable them, you'll have to faff around with the instrument cluster, because the manufacturer hasn't really thought it through or indeed provided you the options via the infotainment system, making them a little bit more accessible. Furthermore, they can only be disabled when you're at a complete standstill. So if you've left the home and you forgot to disable the road sign assist, which often will pick up the wrong speed limit and therefore bing and bong at you constantly, it means the only way for you to get rid of it is for you to come to a complete standstill and then disable it via the instrument cluster. Something I wish that the manufacturer had thought through a little bit better, but thankfully over here when it comes to the lane keep assist, there is a button that can be toggled on and off via the steering wheel. Now, to conclude, I would like to talk about parking and visibility. And first off, maneuverability is an actual breeze, therefore making it very easy to do a 3-point turn. In terms of the visibility at the front and the side, it's a non-issue. Very easy to peer over the bonnet and to check for your blind spot. Furthermore, there's a little cutout towards the front, making it easy when you're cornering. As for rear view visibility, it can be a little bit limited in certain scenarios, just due to the sloped roofline and the design of the vehicle, and there's no included wiper either. Thankfully, you've got front and rear parking sensors and a rear view camera that come fitted as standard across the entire trim range. If you do want to up the ante, you might want to go for the XL trim because you'll find 360-degree cameras. Or you can go for the GR Sport and add a pretty spenny package. Finally, I would like to highlight that there is a digital rear view mirror as part of a package that's available in the XL and GR Sport trims only. This effectively allows you to flick up on the traditional mirror and then also see what's behind you digitally. Handy in certain scenarios, although I do think it's a little bit redundant given the fact that you can quickly peer over to the back or of course look at your rear view mirror. So with all that in mind, it brings us on to a verdict of the Toyota CHR, namely the plug-in hybrid model. And sure enough, it's not exactly perfect across the board. I would have liked if the manufacturer had integrated something that was a little bit more dynamic to drive and didn't sound as loud, especially if you're going to be driving on the motorway. And furthermore, when it comes to those driver assistance systems, they're really cumbersome, and a better way of optimizing the technology would have certainly been appreciated. Headroom and legroom at the back aren't exactly its forte, but should suffice for smaller size families. The key selling point, however, is its overall design, its asking price, and, it goes without saying, its overall fuel economy. And as a result of all of this, I can certainly see myself recommending it, and as such, it gets our Best Buy award. Now I'd be curious to know what you make of it down in the comment section below, and if you'd pick it over some rival alternatives. If you've enjoyed this detailed independent review, definitely do consider dropping a like, subscribing, and hitting that bell notification, all of which would be greatly appreciated. As such, I've been Chris from TotallyEV, and I hope we see you in the next one. Take care of yourselves, and goodbye.